Dust billows as the wagon arrives, not with the promised bride, but a woman and 5 children. Lillian's worn dress whispers of hardship, her green eyes lock with Clayton's. "You must be Clayton Reeves," she says, unaware he clutches a letter bearing a different name. Margaret Sullivan, he thinks, the paper suddenly a brand. A woman with auburn hair and tired eyes stepped onto his land, her worn dress telling stories of hardship. Behind her came a parade that made no sense. 5 children of different ages, each one looking as lost and uncertain as their mother. The youngest clung to her skirt, while the oldest, a boy who couldn't be more than 15, stood protective and defiant. The woman approached slowly, her chin raised despite the exhaustion written across her face. "You must be Clayton Reeves," she said, her voice carrying both hope and desperate determination. "I'm Lillian Harper." Clayton stared at the letter in his hand, then back at the woman and her children. The name was wrong. Everything was wrong. He had sent money for a bride, not a family. He had prepared his heart for one person, not 6. But as Lillian's green eyes met his, something flickered between them that neither had expected. A recognition that went deeper than names or arrangements or carefully written letters between strangers. "I think," Lillian said quietly, glancing back at her children who waited like small soldiers behind her. "We may both be exactly where we're supposed to be." The driver was already unloading their few belongings, and the afternoon sun was beginning its descent toward evening. Whatever had brought Lillian Harper to his ranch instead of Margaret Sullivan, Clayton realized he was about to discover that some mistakes change everything. Clayton's hands trembled slightly as he unfolded the letter again, scanning the familiar handwriting he had read dozens of times over the past months. The words remained unchanged. Margaret Sullivan would arrive on the afternoon wagon, ready to begin their new life together. But the woman standing before him was not Margaret Sullivan, and the 5 pairs of eyes watching him with mixture of fear and curiosity belonged to children he had never agreed to shelter. Lillian stepped closer, her boots crunching against the dry earth. "There seems to be some confusion, Mr. Reeves. The wagon driver said this was the right address. But perhaps," she paused, studying his expression with growing concern, "you were expecting someone else." The oldest boy moved protectively beside his mother, his jaw set in a way that reminded Clayton of his own stubborn streak. "Mom, maybe we should go back to town. Find somewhere else to stay." "With what money, Thomas?" Lillian's voice carried a sharp edge of desperation she tried to hide. "We spent everything we had just getting here." Clayton looked past them to the wagon driver, who was methodically unloading a collection of worn satchels and bundles that spoke of lives packed in haste. The man avoided his gaze, focusing intently on his work, as if sensing the tension building in the afternoon air. "How did you get my name?" Clayton asked finally, his voice rougher than he intended. "How did you know to come here?" Lillian reached into her coat pocket and withdrew a folded piece of paper. As she handed it to him, their fingers brushed briefly, and Clayton felt an unexpected jolt of awareness. The paper was torn along one edge and the ink was smudged in places, but he could make out fragments of his own words. The same advertisement he had placed in 3 different newspapers across Kansas and Missouri. "A woman at the train station in Kansas City gave this to me," Lillian said quietly. "She said her plans had changed, that she couldn't make the journey. She thought perhaps I might be interested in the arrangement instead." Clayton's mind raced. Margaret Sullivan had given his letter to a complete stranger. Had she decided against coming west after all? Had she taken his money and simply disappeared? The youngest child, a girl who couldn't be more than 4, tugged on Lillian's dress. "Mama, I'm hungry," she whispered loud enough for Clayton to hear. Lillian's composure cracked for just a moment, her hand moving to touch the child's hair with infinite tenderness. "I know, sweetheart. Well, figure something out." Clayton watched this small exchange and felt something shift inside his chest. These people were not his responsibility. He had made no promises to them, sent no money for their passage. Yet they stood on his land with nowhere else to go. And the woman's quiet dignity in the face of obvious desperation stirred something in him he thought had died years ago. But as he looked down at the torn letter again, one detail caught his attention that made his blood run cold. In the corner, barely visible, was a name written in different handwriting entirely. The name in the corner was written in pencil, faint but unmistakable. L. Harper, Council Bluffs. Clayton's throat tightened as he realized someone had specifically directed Lillian to his ranch. This wasn't a random encounter or a simple case of mistaken identity. Someone wanted her here. Mrs. Harper, he said slowly, his eyes never leaving the paper. What happened to your husband? Lillian's face went pale, and she instinctively pulled the smaller children closer. He died 6 months ago. Fever took him quickly. Her voice was steady, but Clayton caught the tremor she tried to suppress. We lost the farm soon after. The bank wouldn't wait. Thomas stepped forward, his young shoulders squared with premature responsibility. We've been living in a boarding house since then, but Ma's money ran out last week. The landlord said we had to go. Clayton folded the letter carefully, his mind working through the implications. Someone had known about Lillian's desperate situation. Someone had known about his arrangement with Margaret Sullivan. And someone had orchestrated this meeting for reasons he couldn't yet understand. The wagon driver finished unloading and approached them with obvious reluctance. Mr. Reeves, I need to head back to town before dark. Are these folks staying or coming back with me? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Clayton looked at the children. 5 young faces watching him with a mixture of hope and resignation that spoke of too much disappointment in their short lives. The girl in Lillian's arms had fallen asleep against her mother's shoulder, tiny fingers clutching a worn cloth doll. How do I know you're telling the truth about any of this? Clayton asked, though even as he spoke the words, he could see the authenticity of their situation in every detail. The careful mending in their clothes, the way Lillian held herself with dignity despite obvious exhaustion, the protective stance of the older children around their mother. Lillian's chin lifted. You don't, just as I don't know if you're the kind of man who would honor his word to a stranger. But I can tell you this, Mr. Reeves. I didn't travel 300 miles with 5 children to play games or tell lies. We're here because we have nowhere else to go. The driver cleared his throat impatiently. Sorry, folks, but I really do need an answer. Clayton stared at the rambling house behind him with its empty rooms and silent hallways that had echoed with his loneliness for too many years. He thought about the simple life he had planned with Margaret Sullivan, the quiet companionship he had hoped to find. But as he watched Lillian smooth her daughter's hair with gentle fingers, he realized his carefully ordered world was about to change in ways he never could have imagined. The question was whether he was brave enough to let it happen. Clayton's decision came without conscious thought. Driver, you can head back to town. These folks are staying. The words surprised him almost as much as they surprised everyone else, but once spoken, he felt a strange sense of rightness settle over him. Lillian's shoulders sagged with relief, though she tried to hide it. Mr. Reeves, I want you to know that we're not charity cases. I can work, I can cook, clean, tend animals. The children can help with chores. We won't be a burden to you. We'll see about that, Clayton said, but his tone had softened. He watched as Thomas gathered the smaller children around him, whispering reassurances with the practiced ease of someone who had been forced to grow up too quickly. The wagon disappeared in a cloud of dust, leaving them standing in the sudden quiet of the ranch yard. Clayton found himself studying Lillian's face, noting the determined set of her jaw beneath the exhaustion. She was probably close to his own age, though hardship had carved lines around her eyes that spoke of struggles he could only imagine. There are spare rooms upstairs, he said finally. Nothing fancy, but they're clean and dry. You and the little ones can take the big room at the end of the hall. The boys can share the room next to it. As they gathered their belongings and moved toward the house, Clayton caught sight of something that made him stop cold. Pinned to the inside of one of Lillian's traveling bags was a small tint-type photograph. Even from a distance, he could make out the image of a man in uniform, but it wasn't the uniform that caught his attention. It was the face. The man in the photograph bore a striking resemblance to someone Clayton had known years ago, someone he had tried hard to forget, someone who had good reason to know about both Clayton's loneliness and his recent correspondence with Margaret Sullivan. Mrs. Harper, he called softly, his voice careful and controlled. That photograph in your bag, was that your husband? Lillian paused on the porch steps, her hand tightening on the railing. Yes, James Harper. He served in the cavalry before we married. She turned to face him, and Clayton saw something flicker in her eyes, a weariness that hadn't been there moments before. Where did he serve? Fort Robinson, mostly. Why do you ask? Clayton's mouth went dry. Fort Robinson. The same post where he had served as a civilian scout nearly 8 years ago. The same post where he had worked alongside a young lieutenant named James Harper, until a bitter disagreement over Army supplies had ended their friendship and sent Clayton back to civilian life. The children had stopped chattering and were watching the adults with the intuitive awareness children develop when they sense adult tensions they don't understand. Lillian was studying Clayton's face now, her green eyes sharp and calculating. You knew him, didn't you? You knew my James. Clayton nodded slowly, pieces of an impossible puzzle beginning to fit together in his mind. But if James Harper had known where to find him, if James had somehow arranged for his widow to receive Clayton's letter, then the question that burned through him was simple and terrifying. What had James Harper told his wife about Clayton Reeves? Lillian's question hung between them like a loaded rifle. Clayton could see in her expression that she was remembering conversations with her husband, perhaps putting together pieces of stories James had told her about his time at Fort Robinson. Your husband and I worked together briefly, Clayton said carefully, but that was a long time ago. People change. Not James, Lillian replied with quiet intensity. He talked about his time at the fort often, especially in his final weeks. When the fever was burning through him, he mentioned names from his past. Your name came up more than once. Thomas stepped closer to his mother, sensing the undercurrent of tension. Ma, should we go inside? The little ones are getting cold. Clayton realized they were still standing in the yard. 5 tired children caught in the middle of an adult conversation they couldn't understand. Yes, he said, shaking himself back to the present. Let's get everyone settled. Inside the house, the children's voices brought life to rooms that had been silent for too long. Clayton watched as Lillian efficiently organized her family, sending the older children upstairs with the bags while she kept the youngest close. Her movements were graceful despite her exhaustion, and he found himself noticing details he had missed before. The careful way she braided her daughter's hair, the gentle firmness in her voice when she corrected one of the boys. As evening approached, Lillian insisted on preparing supper, despite Clayton's protests. You're giving us shelter, she said firmly. The least I can do is earn our keep. The meal was simple but satisfying, and Clayton was surprised by how natural it felt to have voices around his table. The children were well-mannered, though he caught them stealing curious glances at him when they thought he wasn't looking. After the dishes were cleared, Lillian tucked the younger children into bed, while Thomas and his brother explored the barn under Clayton's watchful supervision. It was during this quiet moment that Lillian approached him in the kitchen, her expression serious. Clayton, she said, using his first name for the first time. James left me something before he died. A letter. He made me promise to open it only if I ever found myself in desperate circumstances with nowhere else to turn. Clayton's pulse quickened. And did you open it? 3 days ago, when the landlady gave us notice, Lillian reached into her coat pocket and withdrew a sealed envelope, yellowed with age. It contained your name, your address, and instructions to tell you that James Harper kept his word, even from the grave. Clayton stared at the envelope, his mind racing back to that bitter argument at Fort Robinson years ago, to the promise James had extracted from him in their final heated exchange, to words spoken in anger that Clayton had hoped would never come back to haunt him. What promise? Lillian asked quietly. What did my husband mean? But before Clayton could answer, Thomas burst through the kitchen door, his face pale with fear. Ma, there are riders coming up the road, armed men, and they don't look friendly. Clayton moved quickly to the window, peering through the curtains at the approaching riders. 3 men on horseback, their faces obscured by the gathering dusk, but their intentions clear in the deliberate way they rode toward the house. He recognized the lead rider's posture before he could make out the face. Get the children away from the windows, he told Lillian quietly, but don't panic them. Lillian's training as a mother kicked in immediately. She moved through the house with calm efficiency, gathering the younger children and guiding them toward the back rooms. Time for bed stories, she announced cheerfully, though Clayton caught the steel beneath her gentle tone. Thomas remained in the kitchen, his young face set with determination. I can shoot, Mr. Reeves. My pa taught me. Your pa was a smart man. But I can handle this, Clayton said, checking the rifle he kept mounted above the fireplace. Stay with your mother and the little ones. The riders stopped in the yard, and Clayton stepped onto the porch, his rifle held casually but ready. The lead man dismounted slowly, his movements deliberate and unthreatening. Evening, Clayton, the man called. Been a long time. Clayton's shoulders relaxed slightly as he recognized the voice. Marcus Whitley, heard you were working as a federal marshal now. That's right. Marcus stepped into the lamplight spilling from the house, revealing a weathered face marked by years of hard living. Got a badge and everything? We're tracking some men who robbed a bank down in Council Bluffs 3 days ago. Trail led us this way. The other 2 riders remained mounted, their hands resting casually near their weapons. Clayton didn't lower his rifle completely. Haven't seen any strangers passing through here, Clayton said. Just had some new arrivals today. But they came on the afternoon wagon from town. Marcus nodded, his eyes scanning the house and outbuildings. Mind if we water our horses? Been riding hard for 2 days. Of course, Clayton gestured toward the well. Help yourselves. As the men tended to their horses, Marcus approached the porch alone. Heard you had some excitement today. Wagon driver mentioned you took in a family, woman with several children. Clayton's grip tightened on the rifle. News travels fast. Small territory, Clayton. People talk. Marcus stepped closer, lowering his voice. Thing is, one of the bank robbers was a woman. Young widow, they said. Traveling with children to throw off suspicion. Wouldn't happen to match the description of your new guest, would it? The blood in Clayton's veins turned to ice water. Through the window, he could see Lillian moving quietly through the house, settling the children for the night. The woman who had looked at him with such desperate honesty, who had spoken of losing her farm and her husband to fever. What did this woman look like? Clayton asked carefully. Marcus pulled a folded paper from his vest pocket. Auburn hair, green eyes, about 30 years old. Goes by the name Lillian Harper, wanted for robbery and conspiracy. He held out the paper. $500 reward for information leading to her capture. Clayton stared at the wanted poster, his mind reeling. The drawing was rough but unmistakably recognizable. The woman sleeping under his roof, the mother who had braided her daughter's hair with such tender care, was wanted by federal marshals. But as Marcus waited for his answer, Clayton found himself remembering James Harper's final letter, still unopened in Lillian's possession. Whatever promise he had made to a dying man years ago, whatever debt he owed to the past, was about to be tested in ways he never could have imagined. Clayton stared at the wanted poster, his heart pounding against his ribs. The drawing showed a woman with auburn hair and desperate eyes, but something about it felt wrong. The face was too sharp, the expression too hardened. The woman in his house had lines of grief, not cruelty. Well, Marcus pressed this. The woman you took in. Clayton's mind raced through the events of the afternoon. Lillian's exhaustion had been real, the children's hunger genuine. The way she had spoken about her husband's death, the careful mending in their clothes, the protective way the older children watched over the younger ones. None of it felt like the work of a bank robber. The woman I met today has been widowed 6 months, Clayton said slowly. Lost her farm to debt. Doesn't sound like someone with stolen bank money. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. Could be a cover story. These criminals get clever about their alibis. He folded the poster and tucked it back into his vest. Mind if I take a look at her, just to be sure? Every instinct Clayton possessed screamed at him to refuse, but he couldn't afford to make Marcus suspicious. She's getting the children ready for bed. Can it wait until morning? I suppose it could. Marcus glanced back at his men who had finished watering their horses. We'll make camp down by the creek, head out at first light. But Clayton, his voice carried a warning. If you're harboring fugitives, that makes you an accessory. Badge or no badge. Our friendship won't protect you from federal charges. After the marshals rode toward the creek, Clayton stood alone on his porch, the weight of decision heavy on his shoulders. Through the window, he could see Lillian moving quietly through the house, and he was struck by how naturally she seemed to belong there, how the empty rooms had come alive with purpose. The kitchen door opened behind him, and Lillian stepped onto the porch, her shawl pulled tight against the evening chill. The children are asking questions about the visitors. I told them they were just travelers passing through. Clayton turned to face her, studying her features in the lamplight. Lillian, I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth. Have you ever been to Council Bluffs? Something flickered in her eyes. Not guilt, but fear. Yes. We lived there briefly after James died before we lost the farm. Why? There was a bank robbery there 3 days ago. The marshals think a woman matching your description was involved. Lillian's face went white, and she gripped the porch railing for support. Clayton, I swear to you on my children's lives, I've never stolen so much as a loaf of bread. We may be poor, but we're not thieves. The conviction in her voice was absolute, and Clayton found himself believing her completely, but belief wouldn't protect her from Marcus Whitley's badge. Those marshals are camping by the creek tonight. They want to see you in the morning. Clayton watched her face carefully. There's something else. One of them knows me from years back. Years. He won't just take my word that you're innocent. Lillian was quiet for a long moment, then reached into her coat and withdrew James's letter. Then perhaps it's time you read what my husband wanted you to know, because I have a feeling our lives depend on it. Clayton took the envelope with trembling fingers. The paper was worn soft from years of careful storage, and James Harper's familiar handwriting across the front read, "For Clayton Reeves, a promise honored." Under the lamplight, Clayton broke the seal and unfolded the letter. James's careful script filled both sides of the paper, and as Clayton read, memories from 8 years ago came flooding back with painful clarity. Clayton, the letter began, if Lillian is reading this to you, then I am dead, and she has found herself in desperate circumstances. You are probably wondering why I directed her to you after all these years, especially given how our friendship ended. The answer lies in the promise you made to me during our last conversation at Fort Robinson. You were right about the supply contracts. The corruption you discovered would have destroyed innocent families if exposed the wrong way. When you told me you would rather walk away than see women and children suffer for their husbands' mistakes, I knew you were a man of honor. But when you said you would protect any soldier's family in need, no matter the personal cost, you gave me something more precious than friendship. You gave me peace of mind. I never forgot those words, Clayton. During my darkest moments in the war, when bullets flew and death seemed certain, I held on to the knowledge that if something happened to me, there was one man I could trust to keep my family safe. You may think I trapped you with this letter, but I prefer to believe I am giving you the chance to be the man I always knew you were. Lillian knows nothing of our history or your promise. She believes this is a simple arrangement between strangers. If you choose to honor your word, she will bring you more joy than you can imagine. If you choose to walk away, I will understand. But please, for the love I bore you as a brother in arms, at least give her and the children a chance. Clayton's hand shook as he finished reading. Lillian was watching his face intently, her green eyes reflecting the lamplight. He wrote about you often in his personal journals, she said quietly, always with respect, sometimes with regret. He said you were the most honorable man he ever knew, even when honor cost you everything. Clayton looked up at her, seeing not just the desperate widow who had arrived that afternoon, but the woman James Harper had loved enough to trust with his final gamble. Lillian, 8 years ago, I made your husband a promise. I told him that if any soldier's family ever needed protection, I would provide it. No questions asked. And now you're trapped by that promise, Lillian said, her voice heavy with understanding. Clayton shook his head. No, I'm freed by it. He folded the letter carefully. Because it gives me permission to do what I wanted to do. The moment I saw you step off that wagon, but before Lillian could respond, Thomas burst through the door again, his face white with terror. Mr. Reeves, there's someone else coming. A woman on horseback riding hard, and she's got a gun. The woman who rode into Clayton's yard bore a superficial resemblance to Lillian, but where Lillian's face showed the soft lines of motherhood and grief, this stranger's features were sharp with desperation and anger. Her auburn hair was darker, her build smaller, and the way she held her rifle spoke of someone accustomed to violence. You took something that belongs to me, she called out, her voice carrying across the yard. The money from Council Bluffs. Where is it? Clayton stepped protectively in front of Lillian, his own rifle ready. Lady, I think you have the wrong place. The woman laughed bitterly. Don't play games with me. I know Lillian Harper came here. I've been following her for 3 days, waiting for her to lead me to where she hid my share of the money. From down by the creek came the sound of horses moving fast. Marcus and his men had heard the commotion and were riding hard toward the house. The real criminal had just delivered herself to federal marshals. You're the one they're looking for, Lillian said with sudden understanding. You used my name in council bluffs. Smart woman. Too bad you won't live to appreciate how clever I was. The stranger raised her rifle, but Clayton was faster. His shot knocked the weapon from her hands and she tumbled from her horse just as Marcus Whitley thundered into the yard. The next few minutes passed in a blur of shouted commands and the metallic click of handcuffs. The real criminal, a woman named Sarah Blackwood, who had been using stolen identities for months, confessed everything in hopes of a lighter sentence. She had heard about the widowed Lillian Harper in Council Bluffs and had used her name for the bank robbery, never suspecting the real Lillian would flee west and complicate her plans. Looks like you were right about your house guess, Marcus said to Clayton as his men prepared to leave with their prisoner. Sorry for the trouble. After the marshals departed, Clayton and Lillian found themselves alone on the porch again. The crisis that had threatened to tear them apart now resolved. The night was quiet except for the distant sound of children's laughter from inside the house, where Thomas was entertaining his siblings with stories. So, Lillian said softly, what happens now? Your arrangement was for a mail-order bride, not a widow with 5 children. Clayton reached out and took her hand, feeling the calluses that spoke of hard work and sacrifice. My arrangement was for someone to share my life with. The details were never as important as I thought they were. Lillian's eyes filled with tears. Are you certain? This isn't what you planned. No, Clayton admitted, looking through the window at the children who had brought such life to his empty house. It's better than what I planned. It's what I never knew I needed. 6 months later, Clayton Reeves married Lillian Harper in a simple ceremony attended by all 5 children in half the town. The ranch that had once echoed with loneliness now rang with the sounds of family, children's voices, Lillian's gentle singing, and the contented silence of 2 people who had found their home in each other. James Harper's promise had been kept, but more than that, it had given Clayton the greatest gift of all, the chance to discover that sometimes the best things in life come in packages we never expected to receive. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable tale where destiny and courage collide in ways you never expected. Don't forget to subscribe and consider a super chat to help us keep bringing you more stories like these. Your support means everything to us.